Hey guys, welcome back. This is going to be titled Running Away as my original video because I was addressing the fact that as a third culture kid, especially immediately upon reentry into your passport country, you are often tempted to run back overseas, anywhere overseas. And that's where I'm going with this particular video.
Hey guys, I just wanted to do a short clip regarding wanting to stay in your home country versus always seeing another country as the grass is always greener. Um, the thing is that a lot of us who grew up as TCKs do tend to gravitate to foreign countries other than our passport country. For instance, I had a romantic view of Canada. I did have several friends there, but it was also just not the United States. The same thing with England. A lot of us have that. Um, but I recently came across a friend of a friend who actually their passport country was England, and they have always seen the United States as the promised land, kind of. And I just wanted to say this while I was thinking about it. Um, Actually, the grass is not necessarily greener here or there. It is easier to live. If you struggle with the issues that a TCK will, then you are drawn to move overseas, to move to a foreign country, to some place that is not the country that you are expected to identify with and the culture that you're expected to identify with.
That's the key. I said that it would be easier. I didn't mean that it would be easier just across the board. It's easier a little bit if you get to move to a country that you're also not expected to be a citizen of because the rules are different, as I'll elaborate, I'm sure.
Because then, for instance, if someone from England came here, from the UK, then they would not necessarily be expected to operate as Americans. They would be expected to operate as members of the United Kingdom who don't really understand American customs. Therefore, they kind of get a break.
And the reason they wouldn't immediately get a break is, first of all, Americans do have this fascination with British accents. I don't really know how to explain that, but it is definitely true. And if you have a British accent, or there are a lot of people I can tell who do not know how the difference between an Australian accent, a New Zealand accent, a British accent, a Scottish accent, an Irish accent. Pretty much, if you have an accent, you get a break here. I don't know why. Certain accents, if you got a Southern accent, you treat it different. Everybody with an accent is treated in a different way. So, specifically, British and I guess certain European countries, etc., get a break, and we're just not going to treat you the same, and we're not going to definitely not going to expect you to understand American culture because we're not going to assume you're American because you don't sound American.
And if we were to be in the United Kingdom, we would kind of get a break because we'd be Americans, you know? We wouldn't be necessarily
Mm-mm.
expected.
That's where it's different because if an American is anywhere overseas, um, unless you're in like a South American country, but even now, I'm not entirely sure that that even works now. Um, Americans have a really bad reputation overseas. It's an unfortunate reality. Uh, and it's not wrong. The stereotypes are always created because there are people like that. But yeah, it's not necessarily the same the other direction.
To understand all the ins and outs. So, I just want to encourage you guys if you're considering moving overseas or if you've been constantly foreign country hopping or maybe you're living in a foreign country right now, a foreign country is something other than your passport country. Just remember that it is easier, and I personally was tempted, and there's nothing wrong with it. But as long as you realize that regardless of where you are not really going to feel content and at peace with yourself You're just going to be living in a country that might be slightly easier to operate in versus your passport country. If you never deal with the issues that you're going to face in your passport country,
This goes across to a lot of third culture kids are also facing trauma recovery, and it applies across the board. It's difficult for me to separate out my third culture kid issues and my trauma issues because a lot of times they seem to mirror each other and or exist in tandem because that's just how it was. But my temptation to run away was also in part running away from things that I could never run away from because I had to face them in myself. And it's actually true as I'm talking about it. You have to face these things down and accept the reality and learn to work through them instead of just running away to another country because it's easier. Um, I know so many missionary kids that I can't be sure because I'm not them. But I've always kind of felt that there were a lot of missionary kids that I grew up with that ended up right back overseas, not necessarily always just because they felt the call. I think a lot of us really just wanted to go home. And even if it's a different country, it always feels more like home than our passport country does. Especially if, like, I grew up in a South American country, I could go back to any South American country and still feel like I'm more at home than I will here in the United States. So there is that draw. And I think I recognized that early on. And I remember thinking, I didn't want to just go because of that. I wanted it to actually be that I was going because I felt like this was what God wanted me to do, not because I personally needed to go home. I felt like that wasn't the right reason. And I was right. I was correct. But I don't think it's always bothered me because I've always felt like a lot of people did end up doing that, but maybe they don't recognize it. I think it's okay if you do it if you recognize it, but if you're not recognizing that that's a huge reason that you're doing something, it's just a lack of self-awareness. It's a lack of understanding the real issue, and it means that we're passing on a legacy that doesn't need to be perpetuated, in my opinion.
and in some cases, you just continue to hate the culture in your passport country. It's not actually ever just going to work itself out. You're going to have to face it at some point.
Yeah.
And living in a foreign country is all great, but you're going to somehow manage to escape facing the reality of the fact that you do need to stop hating your culture. It's not yours. I understand this, but you can't hate it forever. And seeing another country as a promised land is not going to solve the issue at home. So it's just important to identify this, I think, to know what your reasonings are for living in a country other than your passport country. And if you understand that and you still want to live in Timbuktu, go for it. But if you're only living in the other country because it's easier and because you have an unrealistic view of that culture simply because they don't expect you to operate by means of that culture, but in your home country they do expect you to know, even though it's not reasonable, they're still going to expect you to. And so that's where the turmoil comes from. So just make sure that you're facing the reality and that you're not just going to continue running away. Because if you just run away all your life, then either you'll spend your entire life running away and you'll always feel slightly discontent and never really come to terms with the issues, or it'll come back to bite you at some point anyway. So, something to think about. Love you guys.
And I think, once again, that applies across to the trauma and the PTSD as well. At some point here on this channel, I will get into PTSD and the complex version of it that children experience. I'm not going to do that today, but I can see how a lot of the things that I was speaking to as a third culture kid and thinking that that was the whole reason behind a lot of the struggles I was having. And I seem very clear and very in control and like I absolutely know what's going on and how I'm handling things because I felt like I was. I felt like I had something to offer the world, and maybe I did. I probably did. Because I mean, I look back at that and it's good for me to think about again. But I thought I had it all figured out. Don't we always? Like right now, I'm pretty sure that I have it all figured out, right? No, I know I don't. But it's tempting to think that you do. So back then, I thought everything was about the third culture experience. Did not acknowledge at all the fact that I had a whole boatload of trauma to face. I thought that I dealt with it because I thought that my issue was with my mother. And it wasn't. Yeah, there was a lot of hurt there and we had worked through that. But that didn't address the baseline. And I didn't get to that until, 3 years ago? And this was a 10-year-old video. So there's always a lot more to do. But I think it's important to recognize that you can run away from anything, and running away never solves anything. And some of us have reached a pretty severe point of trying to run away, let me just say. I believe here on YouTube we refer to it as self-deletion, and I've been there, and I know a lot of people who have. So just know that that's just another way of running away. And even though it feels like you'd be doing the world a favor, you wouldn't be. And you certainly aren't doing yourself a favor. But it can be hard to recognize that in those moments. So running away is never the answer. And it's cliche, but it's true. And it's some of the hardest thing I've ever done is to turn around and face the monster. And monsters, but it's worth it. And I don't really have any recorded videos of a lot of the discussions that we had on my stream on Twitch regarding these issues, and I'm kind of sad that we don't, but it was a different time, different place, different platform, and I really wasn't into saving it. It was about the moment and the discussion that was happening then. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing here, is maybe talking about some things that I have talked about in the past, but there's no real record of it. And I feel like maybe that could be useful to someone else to just hear that they're not alone and that this is a very real thing. So this was about third culture kids. Excuse me, this side. But my entire experience is way more than the third culture. It is also a lot of trauma recovery, and I'm pretty dang sure that a lot of third culture kids and a lot of other people, but mostly I'm speaking to third culture kids who have a lot of trauma recovery as well, because it can be difficult to separate those two realities and realize which one you're dealing with, because it just adds another dimension, another layer. So anyway, I'm going to cut it there. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Close as I am now.